Pokemon. I don't even need to start on why I love Pokemon. You all get it, I'm obsessed with Pokemon, it consumed my life, everyone knows at this point. One of the things I enjoy in the main installments are the catching games. Well, I didn't find the Pal Park to be very fun, but the Poke Transfer minigame from Gen 5 was pretty cool. The catching minigames I enjoy the most are the Safari Zones. In the main series, there are 5, technically 6 versions of the Safari Zone, and I'll be talking about all of them in order from worst to best in my opinion. But anyways, let's not waste any more time like we always do and start from the bottom. And at the bottom is the Friend Safari from Pokemon X and Y. To be honest, I feel like X and Y are very overhated because they're still good games on their own. But note that I said on their own, because that carries on with the Friend Safari. You first gain access to it in Cloud City after finishing the main story. A woman will be inside and she'll ask which Friend Safari you want to enter. This is a cool idea and concept, having different areas based off friends registered on your 3DS. Unfortunately, the actual safaris hardly feel like one and are just fenced areas with tons of grass. There are only 2 to 3 Pokemon available in each safari, which feels very lacking. But the worst thing is, it's barely a safari zone at all. The Friend Safari plays out just like a regular wild encounter, with being able to use your own party members to weaken wild Pokemon you find, and no special Pokeball or any exploration. Though it's not all bad. The chances of finding shiny Pokemon are increased here, and you can even find Pokemon with hidden abilities. This is what I meant earlier. The Friend Safari on its own is interesting, but it's just a terrible Safari Zone successor. Coming in at number 4 is the Great Marsh from Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. How ironic, my least favorite main series games didn't make the bottom. Strange, isn't it? Well, I guess this one was also in Platinum, which I really like, but I digress. The Great Marsh is much more of a traditional Safari Zone compared to the Friend Safari, where you're given a limit of 30 Pokeballs to catch the Pokemon, and you can't use ones in your party to help weaken them. But there are 2 fundamental flaws. For one, there's a lot of thick mud that can make traversing a huge pain, but that's not even the biggest problem. There are 2 different types of Pokemon you can capture here, ones that appear in any of the areas at all times, and ones that only appear randomly, depending on when you enter. The Pokemon that appear at any time are limited to ones like Tangela, Wooper, Magikarp, and Yanma, but the Pokemon that change can only be caught in the Great Marsh most of the time. The only way to know which Pokemon will appear in what area is by looking through the binoculars on the 2nd floor of the entrance, which costs money each time. This may seem helpful, but the Pokemon you'll be looking for may not appear unless you constantly check, and you're only given a glimpse of a portion of an area, so you probably won't know where these Pokemon actually are. To make matters worse, you have a step limit of 500 each game, so overall it's just a mess. But in Platinum you can at least get the matchup checker app for the Pokédex if you capture 5 Pokemon in a single Safari game. The Great Marsh had the potential to be decent, but the timed encounters and thick mud ruin it completely. Luckily, this is the last of the awful Safari Zones. At number 3 is the original Safari Zone, the one from the Kanto games. This Safari Zone set the ground rules for how future Safari Zones should play. You don't use Pokemon, you use a special type of ball, and you have to use rocks and bait to affect the capture rate and chances of a wild Pokemon running away. If you throw rocks, the Pokemon has a higher capture rate, but also a higher chance to escape, and it's vice versa for bait. This is actually the only Safari Zone you're required to play in, because in the Kanto games you receive the HM for Surf and the owner's gold teeth, which you give to him for the HM for Strength. This unfortunately has a chance of soft-locking Red and Blue completely, although it's very unlikely. Another problem is the step limit, which gets pretty annoying when you're trying to catch a certain Pokemon or heck. Even look for the 2 aforementioned HMs, but you have to leave and pay more money just to get another shot. But the only real problems are those 2 things, and it's a good start for what was to come. Number 2 is home to the Hoenn Safari Zone, but by that I mean the one featured in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, they removed the game aspect, which would probably rank it as the 2nd worst. But anyways, the Hoenn Safari Zone isn't too different from the Kanto Safari Zone. There are 4 main zones, Safari Balls are used to catch Pokemon, and instead of weakening Pokemon, non-conventional tactics are required. Something new are the Pokeblock feeders, which basically let you find Pokemon that would enjoy said Pokeblock easier. Instead of throwing rocks and bait, you instead either throw Pokeblock, which functions like throwing bait, or edge closer, which functions like throwing rocks. See, Mother Series, edging closer can mean something useful. Anyways, it doesn't change much, but hey, at least it doesn't make you look like a jerk. One of the biggest improvements from the Kanto Safari Zone is that it's completely optional, so anyone who doesn't care for the Safari Zone are free to avoid it. In Emerald version, they added 2 more zones that are accessible once you enter the Hall of Fame, and these areas contain Johto Pokemon that are unobtainable in any of the other Game Boy Advance games. This is really helpful since the Generation 3 National Pokédex was really hard to finish since you couldn't transfer Pokemon from the Game Boy Color games. They still didn't remove the step limit, but that's the worst I can say about it. However, there's still one more Safari Zone, and I think you all know what it is. But before I get to that, here's an honorable mention, the National Park from the Johto games. The reason why this wasn't included wasn't because it's worse than the others we've talked about, it's just technically not a Safari Zone, but it does function similarly. On Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, if you head to the southern entrance of the National Park, you can enter the bug catching contest, where you have to look through the tall grass finding bug-type Pokemon. You'll be given 20 sports balls / park balls depending on which Johto games you're playing, and you have 20 minutes to catch the best bug type. For some reason, none of them are new Johto Pokemon, but in Heart Gold and Soul Silver you can catch bug types from Hoenn and Sinnoh after unlocking the National Pokedex. The way the best bug type scored is really weird, depending on level, HP, IVs, and how rare they are. What's really annoying is that the first place prize is a random evolutionary stone, and this is one of the only ways to get any of them in Generation 2. With all these problems in mind, I still don't think the bug catching contest is as bad as the Great Marsh and Friend Safari, and it still isn't really a Safari Zone, so I'm willing to cut it some slack. But anyways, on to the actual number one. The best version of the Safari Zone by far is obviously the Johto Safari Zone from Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Since Gold and Silver were unfortunately missing the Safari Zone, I'm really glad Game Freak went out their way to make this. They even made 2 new routes for it. It has the same basic mechanics as the previous Safari Zones, like using 30 Safari Balls and increasing or decreasing capture rate by using mud or bait. However, Game Freak removed one thing that was really obnoxious about other Safari Zones, and that was the step limit. Now your game is only over if you decide to retire or run out of Safari Balls. But that's not all. This Safari Zone is incredibly customizable. A few hours after checking out the Safari Zone for the first time, the owner will tell you about the Area Customizer, where you can move the 6 different areas with different terrains, adding on to the amount of Pokemon you can find. And speaking of Pokemon you can find, they let you encounter some that you could previously only get in the post-game, like Larvitar and Houndour. There's also some sort of block system which you unlock in the post-game. I've personally never tried it out, but apparently you can add new parts to each area map, adding on to the customizability. So yeah. This is clearly the definitive Safari Zone. It removed one of the biggest problems I had with the other Safari Zones in the first place and also adds tons of other great things, easily making it the best in the series. And there you go, all the Safari Zones rank from best to worst. I feel like most people would agree with this, but if you disagree with some of the choices, then let me know. Well, of course people will hate this video. I said that Diamond and Pearl were my least favorite Pokemon games. But anyways, until next time, this is Blue Ninten, rambling more about RPGs. Because that's what I'm obsessed with, not just Pokemon. Okay, just Pokemon. And Chrono Trigger.